I'll concede your point just for brevity. But
What? Brevity? We don't do that around here. It's probably
No.
Citrus, or what is a Capital One Bowl? It used to be Citrus Bowl, right? Yeah,
oh my
Capital
God,
One.
dude, where have you been?
I just like the real name.
It hasn't been the Citrus Bowl since 2002?
What was your highlight side dish from Thanksgiving?
Oh gosh, Scotch.
This is the Buck Around, the podcast devoted to all things Wisconsin Badger football from a fan perspective. Featuring your hosts, Richard Branch and Maxwell Brusky.
And hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Buck Around. Welcome back to episode, as I just said to the two people I'm staring at right now, I'm going to call it 324 of the Buck Around, which I'm 99% sure is correct. I am one half of the Buck Around, Richard Branch, joined, as always, by my punctual, you know what? I'm going to make the dig, colleague Maxwell Brusky. Max, thanks for being on time today.
Got it. Just in time. It was clock said 11:00.
Yeah, you did it perfectly. And we today are joined by a man who's no stranger to the show, the one and only. I'm going to call you the star of Badger Extra. How about that? We need a new
hey,
thing.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, there he is. You know the voice, Colten Bartholomew. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on, guys. It's always fun.
Well, more like thanks for coming on, because you've been doing this as a nonstop grind since July. What was it, July 28th or whatever it was? I think when it started. So you're a true gentleman to be here, to say the least.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
So should we just get to it?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Let's fire it away. We're gonna talk some Badgers here. We're gonna get a little weird and granular. We'll start right out with a listener question. Our friend Ben from LA, when he's not obsessing over 6 foot tall cornerbacks, which he's not really doing anymore because they're more common, asked you specifically about Tyler Van Dyke. And his question is this: a lot of ups and downs last year in camp. I think when people were talking about it, it was there's flashes of explosions, but then there's kind of up and down. And then we had a spring game with 27 interceptions that we got to see, and then it never really translated into the season. I think Ben's term was, it was like a canary in the coal mine. How would you compare quarterback consistency? I guess specifically he's asking about this year versus last.
Yeah, I think when you specifically look at Van Dyke, the one thing that's, I would say, probably the most consistent is the intermediate to deep passing. His accuracy and his ability to push the ball down the field is something that I think Wisconsin's been missing for a while. And in terms of this offense, we saw the effect of not having an efficient downfield passing game last year, where, yes, you can spread the teams horizontally with your formation, extra receivers, whatever. But if you don't threaten them down the field, they don't have to respect it, and they still load the box. That's why you saw the running game, I think, struggle at times. Obviously, the running back injuries didn't help, but the running game got kind of bogged down when there was more guys in the box. Will Pauling started getting a little bit more focused, and then not taken away, but just harder to make plays after the catch when there are so many people around him right when he catches the ball. So I think in terms of consistency and things that we can see, expect out of Van Dyke, pushing the ball down the field a little bit more. I mean, you just personality-wise as a quarterback, he's more aggressive than I think even a Mordecai was last year. I think Mordecai is a little bit safer in terms of if the deep shot was there, he was able to take it and wanted to. But I think Van Dyke's got a little bit more of that. Okay, my guy might be covered, but I'm giving him a shot if it's one-on-one, especially for Bryson Green. They've really made a nice connection here, particularly in fall camp. So I think those are the two things I would say. And then in terms of inconsistency, the one thing that you're never going to see 100%, even on the easy passes from quarterbacks. There's going to be physical mistakes, like a ball just comes out bad or whatever. But I would say some things like coming out of the backfield, Van Dyke either throws a little bit too hard or gets a little high with it, so guys aren't able to run all the time with continue running, I should say. Continue the route running out of the backfield. I don't know why that seems to be a consistent issue. I think Mordecai even had some issues with that last season as well, and Braden Locke did for sure. So I don't know if that's just a tougher pass and throw than I'm aware of as a viewer, but I would say that maybe the one inconsistency is just some of the accuracy on the swing passes and the things out of the backfield, which they've got to get corrected, I think, because because of the talent they have in the backfield this year, that's actually going to be a bigger part of what they can do. Like, you're not going to see 250-pound Braylon Allen catching those and trying to dance with the linebacker at the line of scrimmage. You're going to see Tyree Walker or Cade Yakameli or somebody beating around the edge and getting yards out for those plays, I think.
Yeah, I think, I think of that too. And there were so many last year where the rhythm was off, and if you get it just a little behind or not in stride, it messes everything up. And of course, there's I think probably the one that was in your head was the lock one against Indiana, the fourth down play. That was 5-yard pass. I'm glad you mentioned lock too. And one of the questions that we had is this 1A 1B thing. I mean,
it's amazing when a coaching talking point's like a political talking point where every coach has to say it. They seem like, or maybe they just hear it from Fickle so often they just have to get it out there. But yeah. It has just been every position there. They talk about it. It's like, come on now. What are we doing here?
And that's kind of, and I feel like that's kind of the way that you should take it, or that fans should take it. I mean, it seemed pretty clear, especially with that Sunday determination and Sunday disclosure. But what was it? Tuesday announcement. It was a couple days later where these guys knew about it. I mean, and from everything I've seen, once we're about 2 weeks or, that second week of Platteville, it was pretty clear. I hate to go back to that Anderson thing, if anybody who's here knows, who we're picking, but it does seem like that. So I don't know what the 1B thing, that's not, especially with the quarterback. Would you say it's a pretty clear delineation? And I know Locke's improved a lot, or it seems that he has, but how much is the gap, I guess?
Yeah, I don't think the gap is as big as it was maybe late in spring ball. I think Locke has improved a good amount from what we saw in the fall. I think the biggest thing is some of the physical challenges that Locke has compared to a Van Dyke in terms of just the arm strength and the ability to fit the ball in tight windows. I think between 0 and about 15 yards, they're about the same. I think they're pretty much the same guy. But then when you get down beyond 15 yards, there's just an accuracy and a touch. Because when you look at how Locke has to throw the ball deep, it's not quite a pop-up, but there's not as much zip and kind of flat trajectory where he gets the ball to turn over. And that's something that Van Dyke does really, really well. And if they can get to that more consistently this year with some of maybe the corners and the deep crossing routes that we see a lot in practice, but I don't think translated to the field as much. There's a lot of reasons, I think, for that. But those are the things that I think separate them and why Van Dyke got the nod here. But when we talk about the 1A, 1B for the quarterbacks, I think a lot of how the quarterback position was talked about this offseason and in training camp was trying to kind of thread this needle where they brought in a senior quarterback that had 1 year of college left. Every sign, every writing on the wall is he's going to be the guy. But they've also got a guy in Braden Locke that if things go well for them, it's either him or maybe Matoria next year at quarterback. And then obviously Layden Locke is Braden Locke's younger brother is a 25 recruit. So I think they're trying to thread this needle of they know they can't screw themselves in future transfer recruiting if they bring Van Dyke in and don't play him. Because even if he was demonstrably worse than Locke, it was going to hurt them in the future for transfer recruiting. And then also respecting Locke and continuing a good relationship with him as good as you can if you don't play a guy, because they've got his younger brother in the pipeline too, and they need to continue bolstering the talent of that quarterback room. So I think that's how I've kind of mentally framed what we've heard a lot from coaches and everything. Braden Locke has been better, but Van Dyke is clearly the better option, I think, for this team this year.
All right, so you got me to the one part. I feel like all of that made sense, or not made sense. What's the word I want to use? All of that fits that framework, except for the one part that I thought was interesting was Fickle's last, I think it was the last availability or second to last, where he, like, if you want to call it, tiptoed right up to basically saying Braden Locke, we're not taking a transfer quarterback next year, I think was more or less the language he used, as in the starter next year is in that room. I mean, is that what you took from that? Or did you take that that's primarily, I just thought it was way more explicit and a lot less political.
And I was just to add to that, it finally was on the Big Ten Network and their kind of preview show. I don't know if how much interaction you guys had with any of that, but there was it was a little bit different than what Fickle said with the availability. I don't know, Rich, if you watched that, it was a little more like the options were open for potential, which I didn't get that at all from Fickle. I thought it was as close as you could be to say, yeah, we're not doing that next year. So
Yeah, I know from top to bottom in the offices they don't want to. They know that this run of trying to get 1-year quarterbacks is not a good way to go about it. And once you get on this cycle, I think Michigan State's a good example. Once you get on this cycle of relying on on transfers, especially at some really key positions, they're not quite as reliant on a quarterback right now. But once you get on this cycle, it's really hard to break unless you just hit a star in recruiting right away. But I think they're going to have to look if they don't believe in Braden Locke or they don't think Matoyer is going to be ready in 8 months of training. But I think their belief is what they saw in terms of improvement from Locke from last year to this year. If they get somewhere close to that same jump going into 2025, they'll feel a lot better about it. And then imagine that same type of jump out of Matoyer in next offseason. So they can maybe they have a real competition going into the 2025 fall, or maybe Locke just really separates himself there. But I know that organizationally they do not want to do this again. I think they're making sure that they don't make it a declarative. I think they're trying not to make it a declarative statement. We're not going to do it, because if they have to, they don't want to, back themselves into a corner. Especially, what if Braden Locke isn't happy? What if he's not happy about not being the starter this year and decides at the December window to go check his options elsewhere? Like, then they have to, replace that veteran guy in the room. So I think they're trying not to box themselves into a corner, but then at the same time admit, like, hey, we can't keep doing this. We have to develop quarterbacks. Like, if we're supposed to be this improved offense and an offense is really quarterback friendly and people want to play in it, we've got to be able to develop a guy from high school or from early in his career to then become a player for us.
All right. Yeah, that makes sense. So let's do this.
Yeah, I was going to say, Rich, the you were right about that one. Sorry.
All right, so let's do this. Let's get a last thing on Van Dyke, maybe specifically, but a little more explicit. I'm going to give you an option here for 2024. You get Tyler Van Dyke and I realize I think I have one guy on this list, which is before you were covering the Badgers. So if we don't want to use him, we don't have to. And if you see someone from Connecticut snooping your LinkedIn profile, that was me trying to figure out when you started covering the Badgers. That's a side note. But, okay, you can take Tyler Van Dyke or 2019 Jack Cohn. So 18 touchdown, 5 picks, 8 yards an attempt.
Okay. So we're running this offense, right?
We're running this offense. This is and who you think at the end of this season people would say, oh, that guy was better than or worse than. Like,
so this is really tough. So this is really tough because of Van Dyke's injury history. Because Jack Cohn was a tough dude. Like, it wasn't talked about quite probably as much as it should have been back in 19. Just the amount of crap that Cohn was playing through and playing pretty well through. And obviously when you have Taylor to lean on, that affects it. But man, this is truly a coin flip for me. I'm going to go Cohn just because I think the risk aversion, I think that's a good thing for this offense. And then what I believe is a strength in this running back room in terms of versatility and the depth, I think having a guy that's not going to put the ball at risk too often was maybe the better option. But the best version of Van Dyke is better than Jack Cohn that year. But we've only seen the best version of Van Dyke for snippets at a time before he's been hurt. Other things happen. So, like, it's hard to bank on that for 12 straight weeks.
Yeah.
So I would take 2019 Cohn.
Fair enough. And it was 3 years ago, too.
Right.
Van Dyke. All right. This one is before your time, so you can say pass if you want, but I'm going to ask it anyways. 2017 Alex Hornibrook. 25 touchdowns, 15 picks, 8.3.
Yeah, I'm going to go Van Dyke there just because personality-wise, Hornibrook wasn't the most popular guy in the world by the end of his tenure. So I think you got to have somebody in that position that the team generally likes, and I believe Van Dyke has hit that point, so I'm going to go with Van Dyke.
Okay. 2022 Graham Mertz, 1910, 7.2.
Again, kind of the same deal where I got to go Van Dyke just because I saw too much of Graham Mertz at the times that the team needed him to lift him most. just couldn't do it. I think physically they're pretty similar type of quarterbacks because when you watch practice, Graham Mertz never had a problem with putting the ball where it needed to be or pushing the ball down the field. It was just when they got into the games and then the decision making, hanging on reads too long, those are things that just didn't click. And we've seen even with Van Dyke being hurt and not being 100% really the last 2 years starting down in Miami, he still made pretty good decisions. And I've gone back and looked through all of his interceptions, and especially last year, about half of them were either it's late in the game, they're chucking it and they have to get down the field, or the injury is affecting his physical ability to throw the ball, and he had to pop it up a little bit and things like that. So if you get a healthy Van Dyke, I think there's a pretty significant step between him and 22 Mertz.
Actually, one question for you before we do the last one, because like you, I ended up watching all of last year for Van Dyke. ACC Network, by the way, it's awesome you have all your games on YouTube. It makes it very easy. So thank you, ACC Network. But like you said, there was like 3 of them that were, end of game hallelujahs. I mean, there's no loss there. But there were some ducks, right? Like this totally incomprehensible. You think most of those were related to that muscle separation or skin separation?
Yeah. So from what I talked to Van Dyke pretty extensively about was just like challenges that he's faced in his career. For a story we've got on Bad Direction right now, and one of the things was with that leg injury, because like it was basically the skin, muscle, and fat layers of his leg separated from the knee down. So it was super swollen and he couldn't push off his ankle essentially. Just the way that he couldn't fire that last point of separation between his whole body, his throwing motion, and the hand and the ball. That last kind of oomph on the ball just wasn't there for about 6 weeks last year. So I think that's a lot where the pop-up and just the lack of velocity, which has been a strength of his, I think, throughout his career, and we've seen it here in training camp and in the spring, wasn't there. And then, as you mentioned, like there were just some pop-ups and there's some balls that just came out, and you're like, that's not that guy. So I think that was more the culprit than anything else.
All right. And then the last comparison, mind you, you're talking to the chairman of the Tanner Mordecai fan club here, like all-time favorite gritty dude. He's in Dare Ogunbowale territory for me, which is high praise. Tanner Mordecai. 2023 Tanner Mordecai gets in this offense with a center who can actually snap. Or Tyler Van Dyke.
That would have been nice. Yeah. I'm going to have to go Mordecai simply because of the ownership that he had of it right away. I think Van Dyke took a little bit of a backseat when he got here in terms of leadership, just because he had to kind of navigate the lock issue. And I'm not saying there's any divide in the locker room, but I think there were guys that were kind of pulling for Locke just because they had been around him and they knew him better. Mordecai really didn't have that problem last year and kind of asserted himself right away. I think statistically, we are going to see a much better Mordecai had he not been hurt. I think that Purdue game was, even though Purdue was a really bad defense last year, I'm aware, but that Purdue game was a nice clicking point for that whole offense, and Mordecai included. And then, of course, he gets hurt against Iowa and then never gets back on track until the bowl game where they had that month to prepare. So I think I'd go with Mordecai, even though I think physically Van Dyke has a little bit more of the downfield element. I think Mordecai has a lot of the other things that they want, and personality-wise was just a more instant leader of this team.
All right. And then last question on the quarterback, I promise. Prop bet Andy, by the way, prop bets are going to be recorded Sunday night, everyone. Get your entries in. Best show of the year. No offense, Colten. This is the second best show of the year.
I'll take that.
Everybody loves the prop bets, where you can bet on things like, will Mike Lucas like a tweet? It makes your life. It makes the season more interesting. Andy asks, how many games would Van Dyke need to struggle in before they went to lock? This is sort of a version of that. I think it's how real is that 1A, 1B thing? But,
yeah. To me, it would depend on what the struggle is. Is it that the offense as a whole isn't clicking, or is it him turning the ball over, like being careless with his ball handling in the pocket, like fumbling a bunch? So I would say you would need probably 3 games of consistent being, making ill-advised throws, not being smart with the ball in your hand in the backfield. Like, you would need things like that. If they're just not scoring, I don't think there's going to be let's pop lock in there and see if that's going to, provide a spark. I think it would have to be Van Dyke is making a lot of mistakes that you just can't afford at the quarterback position, and then you would move on. And I think it would take 3 weeks of that consistently, where they harp on it. If it doesn't fix, then maybe you look at it. So I don't know how realistic it is because I just don't see that happening out of a guy like Van Dyke. Like they're going to live with interceptions if the decisions are correct and maybe just the ball's a little off or the defender makes a good play. They'll live with those. I think you would have to have those things like I mentioned, like just bad reads, bad decisions, bad ball handling, stuff like that to get him off the field.
Running backs. We had kind of formulated it like, what's the carry split between Malusi and Walker, which it does seem to be that is more of a 1A, 1B situation.
Yeah, that is the only one that I would say is like, oh no, that and outside linebacker. I think there's a few true 1A, 1B spots on this team. So if you're talking just straight carry split, I think it's going to be close to 50-50. And I think that's in part because they need Malusi to continue to be effective and they don't want to have to ride him too hard because they know injury-wise it's just hard to rely on him to be out there 12 games in a row. And I've written multiple times, I understand that all of his injuries have been freak, just terrible luck things. Some guys just have bad luck. That's just how this game goes sometimes. So I think it's going to be pretty close to 50-50. And I would actually throw Jackson Aker in there because I think they want him to be the short yardage back and I think more the pass blocking guy. So I'm not saying he's going to be the third down guy for sure because I don't think you want to give away that your back's not going to be the biggest receiving threat every play or every time you want to throw. But third and long is kind of obvious things. He's the best pass blocker of those three. So I think he's going to be out there a little bit too. So maybe I'd go like 45, 45, 9 or 45, 45, 10 for those three guys. And then as the season goes along, I think you're going to see sprinkles of the two freshmen that have kind of popped here in training camp and then a little bit of Yakameli as well.
Yeah, and you kind of previewed, who would be the third most snaps. And I'm really glad that you had mentioned that about Aker. I had heard you say that on your air as well. And I think it's a really good point, especially with the third down stuff, because it's not he can be effective not just as a pass blocker, but in that role as a pass catcher. That sort of thing. He's got some effectiveness there. I think so. I'm glad that you brought that up. Third most snaps, yeah, Aker, at least in that configuration. How do you see the freshmen fitting in? And just because they do seem to have some spark, I guess, for lack of a better word, even though they're young.
Yeah, I don't think fans are going to have to worry about those guys redshirting. I think those guys are going to get snaps every game. Particular packages, like we've seen a lot of 2 and 3 back sets. I don't know how often we're going to see 3 back. I think that's a little bit more toying with things. Maybe when you get into the red zone for some misdirection. But I think, particularly with the 2 back sets, having a guy like maybe an Aker and then Dylan Jones, that speed versus power kind of dynamic in the backfield, or throwing Dupree instead of Jones, I think you're going to see those freshmen at least 5 to 10 plays a game early on in the season. Maybe if one of them is consistently doing really well, they move up into that top tier with Malusi, Walker, and those guys. But the thing to me is like they just add an element of speed that they don't have. Like Malusi's fast enough, Walker is fast enough. Aker is faster this year, even though he's bigger, which is pretty impressive in terms of offseason work. But Jones and Dupree, just straight line speed and quickness are a different level than I think anybody else they have on the roster. So they're going to get those guys on the field and give them chances. And I wouldn't be shocked if you see a little bit of those guys on special teams if they get to that point where maybe like a Trechka Kahuna is too valuable to the offense to risk on punt return, or Vinny Anthony's looking like he might start at the outside receiver. Maybe they want to at least get Jones and Dupree a chance with the ball in their hand as a kick returner or something like that. So yeah. I think they're going to find ways to get those guys on the field because their athleticism and speed's too valuable to waste right now. And I just don't think you can take away chances at a playmaker on the field.
And just really quick, you did see those guys at certain points taking kickoff returns, right?
Dupree, yes. I don't think either of them took kick or punt returns, but I know Dupree, and then Jones might have, but I know Dupree did for kick.
Yeah, that's why I asked. That's what I thought. And I didn't think they'd be punt returner guys. It's a different skill set and that sort of thing. But yeah, just kick return seems like something where you could see Dupree quick sooner rather than later.
All right. So first off, I know you're talking about 3 running back sets because I made fun of you for talking about 2 running back sets last year. So you have a long memory. I see that. I know what's going on, Colton. Wide receiver, right? Here's the thing. I heard Longo in his availability at the start of camp. I think he was asked name one position group, and he named wide receiver. I think some of that was maybe just to get through the question, but it was interesting to me that he got that, and that's the one he picked. Why would he say that if it's basically the same group with more of Tretch, but Tretch and Pauling obviously overlap? Are you buying that, basically?
I am, because I think they've tweaked the roles for quite a few of the guys. I think last season, Longo came in, and with the addition of wide receiver coach Mike Brown last season, and they realized because they were asking so much different stuff from this group than before, they're asking to read defenses more to figure out where to break off routes, as opposed to here's your route, run it the exact way that we draw it up. Like, they added so many different elements to the receiver groups that I think they had to say, okay, you're an outside receiver, you're a slot receiver, those are your only jobs. Like, hone in on those things. And then this season, I think you've got guys like Vinny Anthony, we got guys like CJ Williams that are doing both. And I think it actually utilizes their skill set a little bit more. Like, CJ Williams, I think, got boxed into the Bryson Green role last season, where it's like, all right, go downfield, win jump balls, and be bigger than other guys. And he can do that. But I think his skill set's probably more set, or better set, for coming across the middle and being a little bit more of a possession receiver, using that size to box guys out and create the space that he needs. But he's got really good hands. I think he's done a really good job on the in-breaking routes this year. And then Vinny Anthony, I think, is going to be, they don't run mesh a ton. I know it's an air raid offense, but they don't run mesh as much as you think they would. I think he's the guy that would be a really good target on some of those drag routes and some of those things that are staples of this passing game that maybe they get to a little bit more this season. But I just think that they've got a little bit more versatility within the position that I think it's going to enhance overall what this position can be. Because last year, you got to remember, you had Chimere DK occupying the one outside line or outside receiver role, Bryson Green at the other one. There wasn't a whole lot of rotation. There wasn't a whole lot of variation with what they were doing with those guys. And I think now they've got a lot more in position versatility that they're going to be able to exploit.
But so here, let me follow up. This is the part that I'm trying to piece together, right? Like, the offense found a way in the pass game, basically through Will Pauling, to, okay, you're going to sit underneath the zone, catch that ball, and fall on it, right? And you can get 7 to 12 yards all day. I get that's what Fickle was talking about, and I get that.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, I feel like it's still missing that X, right? Like that. So that's Bryson Green, which I get, but I think we're also maybe on some level, like, I think we're creating more of a history of Bryson Green than there was.
Sure. I mean, especially because if you go back and look at his games last year, it's inconsistent. There, he had the big one against, he had a pretty good game against Washington State, big game against LSU, happened to be both be losses. And I think he had one more that he had over 75 yards. But then everything else was like a couple of catches and 30 yards. I think that's going to change quite a bit, especially with Van Dyke's more aggressive nature to get the ball down the field. I think Green's going to be poised for a really big season. And he's gotten faster. I think if you just watch him up down the field. But I think the thing that's made him better overall is he's winning at the line better. So the separation is happening earlier in the route, as opposed to having to try to outrun a cornerback. He's being able to, either with footwork or hand fighting or whatever it is, at the line, creates a little bit more separation immediately to let that speed work right away. So I think on top of getting a little more separation, he's the best guy I think they have at working the sideline, jumping over guys, just that physical element of the outside receiver. So I think he's going to have to be that. Like, I know I wrote early on, or right Saturday, the guys that have to step up for this team to be good. And Bryson Green was my number one guy on offense, because you have to have, like you said, you have to have that guy on the outside that threatens defenses. Because even if a defense just has to keep the safety at 12 to 13 yards to keep an eye on Green or stay deeper than Green, that's going to change everything for this offense. You're going to lose one more guy on Will Pauling. You're going to lose one more guy in the running game. Like, I think it's just a big, big thing for this offense for Bryson Green to be good. And I think he's made the physical adjustments to do that. You got to put it on the field and see it, but I think that's happened.
All right, let's talk a little bit on wide receivers. And moving to the tight ends. Interesting position in the offense. Tucker Ashcraft said that his personal goal was to catch 20 passes this year. And is that realistic? Not, and you can attack that a variety of ways, or answer that a variety of ways.
It's realistic. I don't know though, because they've got there's a focus on this team to spread the ball around, right? So that's in his favor. That they're hoping to work other targets onto the field or into the passing game. I think he is their far and away best receiving threat at tight end, so that's going to help his favor. And we've actually seen more of him splitting off the line and working in the slot. So you're in 11 personnel, but really more of a four wide receiver set that should give him a little bit more space and make him a quick option in terms of getting open and finding a zone. My problem with putting a stat number on it is you look at Tyler Van Dyke's career, in part because of the talent that he had down at Miami, and they haven't had a really good tight end down there. He just hasn't thrown to tight ends throughout his career. So it's hard to – he's had good moments with them. I think they've got a pretty decent chemistry in terms of the route tree that we've seen from Ashcraft here in camp. But I don't want to put anything on in terms of numbers because who knows? If Bryson Green's having a great year, if Will Pauling is too, and then Tretch has the year that we expect in terms of getting more volume, like there's not that many more passes, I think, to go around. So, 20 is basically saying 1.5 to 2 a game. I think that's realistic, but I wouldn't say he's going to have like a Jake Ferguson type of season.
This is kind of granular. Just with Ashcraft, he was a freshman last year, true freshman. Have you seen any change in his game, or at least how he where they use him, his body, his speed, his size, his strength? I mean,
can he block?
I don't know. Yeah, and it's just so much with Wisconsin tight ends, and I don't know if it'll ever be the same. Under this offense, I doubt it. But he just came in and he was put in there right away without the Brady Collins treatment and
sure, yeah,
new offense, everything.
Yep.
Yeah, and it just seems like he got really rushed in, and I think he did a pretty nice job. I mean, a lot of guys were rushed in, but in his situation, he seems very unique as far as the type of player that they have in a position that they have.
Yeah, I mean, just interpersonally getting to know him a little bit, I love his attitude because there's a lot of F it, I'm going for it. And even when he was doing a really bad job running blocking last year, at least he was throwing his body in there. Like, he didn't do the technique stuff that you need, but he was willing to take the hits and throw his body, kind of crash test dummy his way through blocking. And if you look at what they did with him in the second half of the year, because they weren't going to ask him to just line up and block an edge, it just wasn't working like that. So that's where a lot of the split motion or split type of blocking patterns came from, where he's coming across the line. He has a defined read, and he gets the advantage of being on the run. And just really his job is to wall off that backside guy. I'm not telling you that you're going to line up Tucker Ashcraft at the Y and he's going to blow guys off the ball, but he's not going to lose as much this year either. So I think there has been significant improvement in terms of how he uses his hands, keeps his feet under him during a block as opposed to leaning forward and getting thrown around. So I like a lot of the technique fixes that he's made. The attitude's always been there. So I think there's going to be a marked improvement in that way, but I still think in terms of how they're going to use them, that split motion is going to be a big part of it. Using him as a blocking decoy, a little bit, maybe some of the delay routes, some pass play action stuff where he starts blocking and he's the first guy out to the flat. That route always seems to be open as long as the quarterback can get spun around and get it to him. So I think there's been a lot of improvement in terms of his blocking and some of the things that they're doing, but there's still another step to be taken to expect him to be that guy that's winning on the edge for you all the time.
All right. Since we're talking about blocking, let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is offensive line depth. All right. We all know, and you talked about this actually I was listening to your show this morning as well. You basically said there's 5 and then there's a gap. Let's pretend there's an injury here. My theory, maybe as they go dark, is basically John Huber becomes Joe Huber, just don't get hurt. Yeah. Because you're the 6th man as well as being a starter. And do you think that's realistic, or are they going to put Nelson at tackle? I mean, because he's the backup center, right? And he's going to be the swing guard, and they bring in the other one. Or how do you see that rotation working? Like, they need 8, right? Or do they need 8? Or is it basically going to be 6 and 7?
Yeah, but see, I think you need 7 to be mildly comfortable. If there's an injury, I think to definitely Jake Renfro or Brunner, I think you would move Huber to those spots just because I think you need a more reliable left guard than you do a right guard, just because you can do things with the running back and the quarterback that at least if they can see it when they're dropping back or when they're catching the shotgun snap, it's a little bit easier than left guard. But I think so. Huber is definitely kind of the linchpin in my opinion because everybody else is a little bit more set in their roles. Huber can do pretty much everything. We haven't seen Huber play tackle here yet. He did at Cincinnati, but we haven't seen him in practice playing much tackle at all. So maybe that's the one kind of line they don't want to cross with him. Just because I think lengthwise he would have some trouble on the edge in the Big Ten. He could get by at Cincinnati, just not being the tallest or longest guy on the tackle spot. But tackle is the real thing to me. It's like if one of those guys gets hurt, if it's the left side, I think they move Runner out and then move Huber over to left and then put Benchwall at right guard. If it's the right tackle, like Riley Mullman's missed the last week, not sure what they're going to do. Barrett Nelson came back in this past week of practice that was open and looked like a guy who had been hurt because he missed the first 2+ weeks of training camp. And, they're really complimentary of what he's done. That must have happened more in the summer that we got to see because he didn't practice much in the spring either. So I think he would be the guy. They're super high on Kevin Haywood, the 4-star recruit. That's a true freshman, and he's had a lot of reps against the top pass rushers because of not having anybody in spring ball and being the number 2 left tackle. But he had a really tough second half of training camp. I think that wall that a lot of freshmen hit in training camp just because it's every single day. It's more reps than they've probably ever practiced in their life. That hit pretty hard, and the question for me is, can you ask Haywood to shift to right guard or right tackle when you spent the entire spring getting him reps at left tackle? And I think there was marked improvement as the spring went along. It's really hard to ask freshmen to flip sides like that just because you're learning the footwork, the hand fighting, the strength you need to work on one side, and to reverse that in your body. That's a thing that takes, I think, an entire offseason, unless you're, a super freak. And I'm not sure. I think Haywood's very, very good. I'm not sure I'd put him in that super freak category yet. So to me, right tackle is the biggest concern because if a Malman were to miss time, I just don't know where you go and feel good about it.
And how is everybody feeling about Malman right now?
So the second week in Platteville, it looked like there was something upper body. It looked like a shoulder, right? We never got confirmation of what happened to him. It looked like a shoulder. Then then they come back to Madison, and then it looked like something happened lower body wise. So I think he was about to come back, then got dinged up again. It sounds like there's no concern for week 1. My concern would be, is he going to be rusty going into week 1 because he has not had a lot of practice time? And then is 2 weeks enough between 2 games and practices in between to be where you need to be at least competitive against Alabama? So that would be my concern. I don't think there's any concern with missing time yet. It would be how effective is he going to be when he's out there?
Gotcha. And he's experienced anyway, so he'd be that would be likely to affect him the least, I would think.
And that was my thing with this whole offensive line is they got incredibly lucky with their offensive line health last year. Their preferred 5, even though it wouldn't have been my preferred 5, but their preferred 5 was out there every game, which was a testament to how much those guys were working. But it's hard to ask that 2 years in a row or expect that to happen 2 years in a row. You've got to have at least a 6th, maybe a 7th guy ready to go.
Yeah, no, definitely. Staying in the trenches. Defensive line, is it better or will it be better? I mean, it got some additions, and it looks like they've panned out. At least from what you can judge through practice, anyway.
Yeah, I think the top 3 group that they've got of James Thompson, Kurt Neal, and Ben Barton had really good training camps, and I think really took well to some of the, I wouldn't say changes, but some of the bigger asks that this coaching staff is putting on them. It's like, all right, you've gotten enough snaps that you can't just be a plugger anymore. You can't just fill a gap. Like, you've got to make some plays for us. I think as long as Thompson's healthy, he can continue the steps he took last season to be that type of guy on the edge, or I'd say the edge, the 4-tech. But Neal and Barton are the guys that, to me, are the keys because we've seen them be somewhat effective. We've seen them struggle. How can you consistently be at least good? You don't have to be great every play. And a lot of times, great plays by an interior defensive lineman aren't going to be noticed anyway. But how can you consistently be good and help the defense in your role? I've seen those guys take pretty good strides in that. And I think Ben Barton in particular, just because he plays kind of a wild style where it is 100% every single snap, might not be the most technically sound stuff, but it's really hard to block him because of how he just continues to come at you. So I think he's a guy that has a chance to have a pretty solid season in that top rotation. And then having those three guys kind of set in the top group allows guys like Hills and Lane, the two transfers, and then Cade McDonald, that second tier I would call in that group, really come in and not have to have a ton of responsibility or a ton of load in terms of snaps, but then try to play as best as they can in those limited snaps. So I think the D line is going to be better. I'm not telling you that they're going to have double-digit sacks or anything, but I think there's going to be more plays where they're in the backfield and forcing some different things to happen. Whereas last year, I think a win for them was just staying on the line of scrimmage and not getting blown off. So I think there's a market improvement there that's not going to be the expectation this season.
Well, we did want to get into some formational stuff, but we also got a listener question that like right before we started, and from a long time friend of the show, Matt Singer, and he's asking, staff found out early last year that they weren't built to run most 3-3-5 schemes. Sounds like the dollar package is going to be featured more heavily this year. Do they have a lineman that can play five technique that Tressel likes to deploy in that line?
So I think what they've done with that dollar in terms of when you because I don't think they're going to go to the dollar until it's obvious passing. Like they're not going to risk it if there's really too much of a threat of a run. But I think what we've seen more of is kicking somebody like Daryl Peterson from the outside linebacker's position into that five tech. And then in that scenario, Jaheim Thomas, the inside linebacker, has gone to the outside spot. And then they get a little bit more speed rush there. And then they trust Peterson to hold that spot, that five tech. I think Thompson can do that too. I just don't think he's got quite enough speed to be a real pass rush threat if he does win in that scenario. So I think it's when you see the dollar package, I think more of it's going to be kicking those outside linebackers in versus expecting the defensive lineman to occupy that role.
And I don't want to take this too far, and it's probably too much to ask, but it's kind of interesting that Ernest Willer got moved to outside linebacker. And Rich and I were talking last time, and his measurables are pretty similar. He'd fit in as a defensive end at Iowa as far as the body style goes. And maybe, a lot to ask of a true freshman, but maybe that's the kind of body style you
no, that's a good point. And I think
technique there.
Yeah, and he has that physical mold, and I think what he's got too is enough length that he can keep offensive tackles off of him while he's beating them around the edge. Because I think that's something that some tackles that try to convert to that outside spot lose, is that ability to bend the edge while keeping your feet moving and keeping the blocker off of you. And Willer's done a good job, I think, of really with mostly effort and athleticism, doing a good job of that. I think give him a full season under Mitchell and Tressel in that outside linebacker scheme, actually learning some pass rush moves and some different things around the edge, because it's a lot more space that he's working with now than he was at the defensive line spot. But I think it does fit him well at that boundary spot. The problem with it is he's going to, especially if he plays in this first year, he'll have to be pass rush only. Like you can't ask Ernest Willer to drop back in coverage right now. And
right.
They did once in the scrimmage on Saturday, and can't remember which tight end it was. He's either Ashcraft or McGohan. Beat him up the field, and it ended up being a drop. It should have been a touchdown, but he's 4 or 5 yards behind that. Like you just can't ask a guy that's making that type of transition to also drop in zone
right.
for the first time in his life at this level. Yeah. So I think the position fit is there. Just when you condense it down to get after the quarterback, beat this one guy, as opposed to here's a full plate of outside linebacker stuff.
Yeah, here's a question. Do you think he's a 1-year rental at that position and then he goes back to end? Like this is a way to get a talented freshman on the field because there's, injuries there now? Or you think this is long-term?
It's a good question. I would think it would depend on how well he does and what he likes better. If he likes this, I think that you look at what they're going to lose next year in Pius and Lowry, guys that are going to play a ton this season. If you have a guy with that type of physicality and pass rush ability off the edge for that boundary spot, I think he might stay there. You've got to find somebody else that would be the more traditional outside linebacker to be, 1A, 1B to use the coach's terms. But I think it's a possibility that he would stay there. But that decision is going to have to be made, I think, in like November, because he's going to have to spend his entire offseason reshaping his body whichever way he's going to go. Because we've seen when they try to do tweeners, and I'm not saying by they, I mean Wisconsin, not just this staff or the previous staff, Wisconsin as a whole, when they try to find tweener guys, very, very rarely does it ever end up well.
Yeah, we won't talk about TJ Bullers. So
many others.
Yeah, well, you know what? Here's one last one that it just kind of popped in my mind as you were talking. Do you think this defense, the defensive line, would be in a better position right now if Paez and Rodas stayed around?
Paez, yes. I think Rodas is kind of, take it or leave it. Like, especially with how inconsistent he was last season. I think physically he was one of the best linemen they had last year. I never questioned that he knew what he was supposed to do. It was just getting it done. Paez, I think, could help in that Kurt Neal role. And I think toward the end of his career, he started getting better at shedding blocks and at least presenting in some holes that in the past he would just kind of plug up. But I don't think that – I'm not sure if you would say keep those guys and lose guys like Hills and Lane. They'd be better.
Okay.
But I think it would be about the same.
Okay. Let's go to outside linebacker, and we're going to do another one of these sort of try to quantify how good these guys are. Picked a guy that you covered who I think he was a fine, nothing spectacular outside linebacker, but played for them in the past. Noah Burks. Mm-hmm. Where would Noah Burks be in this outside linebacker rotation?
So I think he would be the number 2 or 1B, however you want to phrase it, the number 2 boundary outside linebacker, because I think what Pius gives them in that spot in terms of pass rush, they wouldn't take off the field just for a little bit more well-roundedness from the pass rush or from the pass coverage perspective. Because I think Pius is in that same position, like I was talking about Willer. He spent his whole career as more of a traditional D end and just handling the ground, getting after the quarterback. That's really what they're asking him to do at outside linebacker this year. So I don't think that they would take him off the field to get Burks out there for the more all-around type of outside linebacker. But I would say he slots in better than maybe some of the young guys like Anelu, Lafayette, some of the other guys that they're having to work at that boundary spot right now because of some of the injuries there. So I think, 1B outside linebacker or that boundary spot, I think they call it the jack. I think that's where Burks is fit in and be able to help. But they love what Pius has given them. And for a guy that's that big and that tall to have the quickness of his get off that he has, I think there's a legitimate shot that he's getting drafted next year. And people are like, how did he start his career at William & Mary?
Interesting. That's very bold.
Yeah, I know. I'll bring hot takes for you, Rich.
We need this. You got to keep them in for the home stretch here of the show. You're up, Maxie.
Oh, you didn't want to talk about your favorite cornerback? I thought you were going to do that.
I'll do it then.
Yeah, I couldn't. I wasn't going to take
it. All right. I have become obsessed. Max is right. I have become obsessed with Nizer Forkerine just because I think it's so weird that guy ended up a very solid corner, kind of out of no. Like, I don't know. He's very impressive to me. And the coaches have not been shy about hyping over the most improved guy over the summer, blah, 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 blah.
And not only that, Will Pauling said that during the Big Ten. The Big Ten thing, too.
And Mitchell came on here and said the same thing, not even in his position group. Granted, he played for him, so there's that tie. Right.
Very close. Yep.
You know, he definitely certainly gave him that plug. You buy in that? Like, you think he's making that much of a step?
Yeah, I think he's been the only corner that's like fairly well guarded Bryson Green this year in camp, and I think he didn't talk about it until the spring, which I understood because he didn't want to present in the fall last year of making excuses. But he had that thoracic outlet syndrome that didn't let him work out all of 2023 basically until he gets to fall camp and then he got cleared he said like a few days before fall camp started. And you saw late in the year there was such a dip in his ability to win at the line of scrimmage, to really jam anybody. And then even at the catch point, you saw guys having a lot more success working through his hands and working through his body than earlier on in the year. Clearly, the inability to train and kind of condition himself how he wanted to affected how well he could play in the second half of the year. And then you go into this season, physically, you can just tell that there is a transformation, strength and muscle tone and build wise, especially in his upper body. And then, I saw that he was one of their MVPs of the weight room over the summer. And I think the thing that he's doing a lot better job of is he's never going to be the guy that's winning the 40 against the best receivers that you're going to find in the Big Ten. But basically trying to use physicality at the line of scrimmage to negate some of that, right? Like if he can make the guy have to reset his steps and run with them from a zero kind of point, then he's fine. If he doesn't win at the line of scrimmage, he's going to lose, it's a straight line race down the field. But I think he's a guy that he knows he's going to get challenged a lot because quarterbacks are going to see, oh, Hallman had 7 picks last year. Like if I can avoid it, let's avoid it. And he's going to get more looks, particularly because of his position too. Like it's a short side of the field, a shorter throw. Quarterbacks are more 10 more to go to that side. So he's going to have a good year working with the sideline, being physical in that way. I've seen a lot of growth in terms of the physicality, like I mentioned, but just positioning his body in the right spot that even if he's not making the play, the right receiver has to make a really tremendous catch to get it around him. But the big concern for me would be continuing that growth and continuing that work at the line of scrimmage to not have yourself be in a spot where you have to win with speed, because that's just not going to be his strength.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah, the other thing too, I know it's not on the list, but it seems like there's that this camp has shown that there's a lot to look forward to after Hallman and Fortgreen leave. I don't think that's a controversial thing, but what you've seen that, right? I mean, who is really the standouts there that you've seen?
So Xavier Lucas has been kind of one of the freshman stars at camp, like maybe not quite to the level of the running backs, just because if Xavier Lucas is doing his job well, the ball's not going toward him. I think that's one of those things that even I was like, when a cornerback interview day happened in Platteville and guys were raving about him, like, oh, apparently I need to start looking for number 6 a little bit more often, because he hadn't made like an interception or a big play that really stuck out in my mind. But then when you watch him, you can see that the speed's there. At least enough physicality is there. I think that's a step for him this offseason, is get stronger, so upper body wise he can win some of those battles. But then just the instincts are young Hallman like, in terms of being able to read the quarterback, being able to read what the route concepts around him are when he's in zone and jumping some balls. You started seeing that late in training camp. So he would be somebody that I would say maybe by week 5, 6, he might be able to start rotating in a little bit. Jonas Duclona continues to be just solid. I don't think he's the playmaker that a Hallman is for sure, but can just cover, just stays attached to his guy, and there's value in that if you just make every catch hard, even if you're not getting interceptions, I think there's value there. And then Amari Snowden really had a strong camp in Platteville. Maybe a little quieter in terms of making plays once they got back to Madison. Obviously, had the family tragedy with losing his mom. Maybe affected just the ability to kind of lock in some of those ways. But I think once they get to a point where Fortgreen can't be playing every snap, because I don't think that's how they want to play any of these corners, especially early on in the year where they're playing all the time. But I think he's a guy that kind of slot in behind that boundary spot. Maybe him and Delancey getting a little bit of both of those backup reps, however that ends up working out. But I think he's a guy that you can start expecting to see on the field at some point this year.
All right. Maybe sort of along those lines, and I think you mentioned it a little bit, and then we'll let you go, by the way. Don't look at your clock when I said I'd keep you for 30 minutes. Are there any depth chart surprises? And by depth chart surprises, we don't necessarily mean names you'd see or wouldn't see on the 2 deep they release, more like guys that you might notice on the field for 10 or 12 snaps. Are there any people that you think maybe haven't been talked about that will make it, or just as importantly, vice versa? Like guys that people in their minds, if there's someone who pays attention, will be surprised they won't see as much as maybe they have in the past or expect to, for that matter.
So I'll go with on offense. I would say something you're going to see more that just hasn't been talked about a lot is Tyrell Henry, the transfer wide receiver from Michigan State. He had a really solid camp in Platteville. Then he gets hurt coming back to Madison. I think that slowed maybe some of his momentum. But I think Fickle really likes the versatility he brings of being able to work some slot reps, but then be a really solid underneath receiver from the outside spot. So kind of like the same role that Vinny Anthony's playing, but just a little bit more experience, I think, than Anthony's got right now. So I think that's somebody that's going to play. I think they are going to be a little bit more intentional about rotating receivers this year. How they do that with the pace they want to play, I think is still a little bit to be determined, and we'll have to kind of watch that in the first couple of weeks. But I think you are going to see more of the receivers playing because of the depth they have there. And then on defense, I think Kamoy Latu is on that borderline of a guy you're not going to see as much that you maybe get surprised by because Austin Brown's playing really well. Preston Zachman probably had the best 2-week stretch of camp between the last week of Platteville and coming back to Madison of any guy in the secondary in terms of making plays, always being around the ball, creating turnovers. So he's going to play quite a bit. Wohler's going to be out there 90% of plays. So I think there's just it's a kind of a logjam there for a role for Kamoy Latu, and especially when he's a guy that consistently is dinged up. And then in the first half of last year, at least, wasn't a guy you could trust to do his assignment, right? Or kind of stick to where his assignment is. So I think he's on that borderline of a guy that might get squeezed out if things continue to progress like they are.
All right, well, you've given us so much of your time. So we'll wrap it up on this kind of, it's weighty because it's a broad question, okay? And I know you'll have a little bit more predictive type stuff coming out later, so you don't have to scoop yourself or anything on this. But what's the ceiling for this team? And I ask that for, there's a lot of people that have talked about just a lot of analogies between this and 2016. I think the schedule is one thing, but it's also that was Chris' second year. Like this is Fickle's second year too. How much that matters, no idea. But what's the ceiling? And then what's kind of the weakest link that if it broke is going to keep them from hitting that ceiling?
Sure. So I think ceiling. I don't have any record predictions coming out, so I'll give this out here. But I think ceiling it would be 10-2. I don't think they're at the level of Oregon and Alabama quite yet, and especially in terms of depth. So I think if you go 10-2, those would be the two games I would say probably aren't going your way, which is a bummer for Camp Randall season ticket holders because those are both at home. But I just don't think that they're quite there. But I think if everything breaks right, the other 10 games are winnable, and that's still including some really tough games like at USC and at Iowa and Penn State coming here. So I think there would be some highlight wins for this team if you go that route, and you might be flirting with a playoff spot if you've got convincing wins against some of those teams I just mentioned. The biggest thing to me is any offensive line injury because it's a cascading thing because you're going to move somebody from their best spot to somewhere else more than likely, or you're going to put somebody in that's just either later in their career and hasn't been on the field for a reason or a true freshman. So it's to me, if they have an offensive line injury that's for any real length of time, you're putting out somebody that's either not ready or probably just shouldn't be playing quite that much at this level. So those would be kind of my high and low. Like if you have an offensive line injury, I think 7-6 or 7-5, 8-4 is probably your ceiling. But if you stay healthy there, I think and everything else goes well, 10-2 could be where this team ends up.
You're very bold, Colton.
Yeah, try to.
Well, and it's kind of funny too because the 10-2 does kind of fit in with 2016, as it turns out. So,
fair enough.
Yeah,
I wrote it in an observation on what was that Saturday, and I was surprised you didn't get after me about it, Rich. There's a lot of 2021 in this team, and I think this defense could be elite and maybe even as good as that 2021 defense. They don't have the schedule to beat up on that 2021 team did at certain points. The question to me is, can this offense be consistent enough and make enough big plays that they don't, lose a very winnable game that would have made that 2021 season a little bit more respectable, I think, as we look back, as they get to a Big Ten championship game.
Well,
They've been waxed by Michigan. We know that, but
I was waiting, for 4 days to make my 3 running back joke, so I was too focused on that.
Gotcha. That's fair.
So one thing at a time. I don't multitask. Colten Bartholomew, thank you so much for coming back. I don't know, it's been like the 4th time you've been here. And every time I'm like, 30 minutes. We're going to work through this fast, I promise. And then I know you read that and you're like, yeah, sure. Yeah, shut up.
Well, I mean, I know I just talk too much also, so it's not all on you guys.
No, it pretty much is on us. But
time flies when
yeah.
you're having fun.
Thanks again, man. If you're not, but I'm willing to bet like 99% of our audience already is, go subscribe to Badger Extra. It's totally worth your money. Saying that as a subscriber. That's the only reason Colten comes on, because he can't say no to you. So if you subscribe, he'll just talk to you on Zoom. That's his promise.
There you go.
Doesn't matter if you have a podcast or not.
Send a receipt first, but then, we can get some Zooms.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
All right, man. Yeah. Thanks again, Colten. We'll talk to you soon.
Yep.
Thanks a lot.
All right, Max. Colten went off the Zoom call cursing us for keeping him so long. So
he did not. Don't give people the wrong impression. He's like, I know you guys. I planned ahead.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, he did. He did tell his wife it was going to be an hour. So
yeah,
he knew what he was in for. Just before we go, usually we would have just ended with that. It is Tuesday, 1 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern time. We will be recording Sunday evening a prop bet show that, if editor Cody would stop coming up with these excuses. Last week it was a wedding. This week it's a honeymoon. I can't tell I'm eye rolling. Get with the program, Cody.
Seriously?
There's podcasts to be edited, but we'll probably turn it around that night and have it up. So Monday morning when you get in your car or go on your commute, you can listen to the prop bet show. We're going to do the same thing we have in the past. We'll have a Google sheet somewhere. Probably we'll park it on the Patreon page and a post there so you can find it, and I'll put it on the Twitter account and pin it so you can find it there. But I very much look forward to doing that. This show is great. This is like, think of this as homework, getting you ready for the prop bet show, for the prop bets, because while Colten doesn't cover if Mike Lucas is going to like a tweet, he does give you the stuff on the stuff that isn't nearly as important but is in the prop bets. So yeah, look for that. You'll have the week to fill it out and enter. And if you've never done it before, I promise you it's so much fun, because a lot of it is very secondary stuff that keeps you interested, and social media stuff that you can theoretically maybe influence. Andy always does a good job of coming up with those things.
And Andy, the gadfly of Badger Nation.
Yes, he is the gadfly. So keep an eye out for that show. We love doing it. It's mostly Max and I laughing. So for the people who write the reviews that we laugh too much, you might want to skip that episode.
That's probably true, but you got to have it though. Because it's prop bets. And Rich, what's your goal for the prop bets? Mine is it's always to do better than last year.
Which is, I think the two of us finished
very low bar this year.
I think, what did we do? We talked about it at the end, but I always forget. It was like 140 out of 170. I mean, we were terrible.
I think it was our worst performance. And
yes,
I think it was not only both like worst performance as for the pair of us, but like our worst performance each individually.
Yes. You know what? I think I have a strategy for this year. I'm not going to reveal it until
all right. No.
It's going to make me far more successful. All right.
Okay.
Let's wrap this thing. We're running up on an hour here. It's a sunny day. And I don't have any responsibilities, so I'm going to go take advantage of it. It's been fun. I'll see you Sunday. Until the next time.
Sounds good. Until then.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Enjoy the conversation? Head on over to buckaroundpodcast.com to find all the ways to connect with the show, links to our Patreon page, and feeds for every major podcasting platform. We want to thank each and every one of our patrons. You make this podcast possible. This has been The Buck Around, Badger football analysis from a fan perspective.